We've all seen how connection is so important. So connection comes in many forms. It might be connecting with yourself. It might be connecting with others. Whatever that is, find that connection, find the courage to ask for help, and know that you are worth it. All of us are worth it. And just having that courage to say to yourself, I'm important, I'm loved, I'm worth the fight.
Welcome to the Choice Space podcast. I'm Dr. Lee David, GP, CBT therapist and author, and today we're exploring what it really means to grow after trauma or serious illness. When life changes, perhaps through a new diagnosis, a disability, a major loss or a traumatic event, it can feel as though the foundations of our identity and daily life have shifted overnight. Post-traumatic growth is the positive change that can follow these experiences, discovering new strength, deeper relationships, fresh possibilities and a clearer sense of meaning, not by denying difficulty, but by working through it. Research suggests that this kind of growth doesn't just come from positive thinking, but from lived change. This is about reshaping our routines, relationships and priorities so they reflect the values that matter most and allowing these choices to show up in everyday life. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Amrita Sen Mukherjee, GP, TEDx speaker and researcher into hidden disability and post-traumatic growth. And together we'll be looking at how people can move through disability and loss to find a renewed sense of purpose and how aligning choices with personal values can support lasting recovery. Amrita, welcome. Could you start by telling us a little about your background and the focus of your work?
Sure. Thank you, Lee. Thank you for inviting me. You've given me such a beautiful introduction, so thank you. My academic or my professional journey actually started before I studied medicine, and I did a degree in massive management studies. And actually during that degree, I didn't really enjoy my course. I was happy with my friends and my university life, but I wasn't that happy with the direction of my professional journey. And so I would say my interest in really pursuing something that was meaningful and that gave me joy came from my first degree because I did not enjoy it. And so I realised that when I went on to study medicine that it was important for me to find something that brought out me and something that allowed me to be who I wanted to be, essentially. And unfortunately, during my medical degree, my father passed away quite suddenly and unexpectedly. And so again, going through that grief process allowed me to really process life is short. We've been given this one life. How can I live it in a way that does my father and my mother justice, but also allows me to be who I want to be? And so I think subconsciously, these types of narratives were very well embedded in my forward journey. And we all go through trials and tribulations. We all have difficulties in our life that we have to navigate. And I think when I became unwell and I developed my invisible disability, I realized that I needed to shape my career in a way that makes me happy, makes me healthy, and makes me do something in service of others. Because essentially that was why I went into medicine. I wanted to support people in whatever way I could. And I thought being a doctor was the way to do that. And absolutely, I still agree that is the way, but it's not the whole way. It's not the only way. I think that's why I diversified my career, because actually it brought in those strands of who do I want to be, what do I want to offer the world, and how can I continue to help people. And my grief of my dad's passing and my own illness and the grief of my own identity has led me to the path that I'm on now.
And what I'm hearing is about aligning your values and coming at the world in a way that meets you, being authentic, finding what really brings you meaning and purpose, and having that as a priority. So perhaps supporting you to change from an initial degree in maths, which sounds very hard to me and something that I couldn't even contemplate, into medicine, which is also quite challenging, perhaps in different ways, and using that values compass to help you choose why and how, and not just the why, but the how to do it in a way that works for you personally. And then you've also talked a little about some of the challenges that you face. So grief, losing your dad, and then you've talked a little about your illness. Could you tell us a bit more about that? That was, I think, the subject of your TEDx talk, wasn't it?
Yes. Medicine's a funny thing because when you're a doctor, the purpose of your professional journey is to help people and to make them better. And when you're on the other side of that and you're the person who's not very well and people are trying to make better, you almost know what they're thinking and you know what they're wanting to do, but they're doing it to you. And life has placed you in a role where you're very vulnerable. I did not know what my meaning and purpose was for a long time. When I studied medicine and when I became a doctor, it was everything to me. As many doctors or professionals know, we put in a lot of effort to get to our end goal. And when that's taken away, or when the idea or the possibility that we won't be able to fulfill that is taken away, actually that is very isolating and very scary. And you're in a real position of fear. And that was the position I was in, Lee. And it took a lot of moral support from my family, from my husband, from my friends, and the fact that I had children to allow me to realign, essentially. And so I suppose it's almost like having a china doll or something, throwing a ball at it and then it's smashing, and then having to get those pieces together. And they might be in a different order, they might be rearranged, they might have lost their color, something, but you're putting it back together so it looks the same, but actually on the inside it's not, and it's really quite fragile. And that was me for a very, very long period of time. And so I can speak quite clearly now about, I work in a way that supports professional people to reach their peak performance. I work in a way that supports people to develop more self-compassion. And I'm a heart-led coach because I want people to have a space where they can really explore their own identity and who they are. I do all these different things that make me the whole of me. But it took me a long time to get to that point where I had the confidence to do that, because when I became unwell, I really thought that, what's the point of me? I thought, what is the point? I've done all this hard work and now I can't do anything, because to me, being a doctor was the only thing. Because not because I'd studied so long for it, I'd worked so hard for it, because I didn't know there were other options. I genuinely did not understand there were other options open to me. And it took a long time for me to recognize actually what my skills are, how they're transferable, how they're translatable, and how actually being a doctor comes in more than one form.
Would you mind sharing with listeners who haven't yet listened to your TEDx talk, and I would strongly recommend it because it's really amazing, a little bit about what the change was that you were facing?
I developed my symptoms in 2013, but I wasn't offered a diagnosis or medication until 2017. So I went 4 years of experiencing simple partial seizures where I was fully conscious, fully aware, fully able to continue with my activities of daily living. I had to go to work. I was a mother. At no point had that identity been something that I would see myself as, until I was bullied, not believed, not looked at somebody who was a credible person. I had lots of names thrown at me that I was malingering, that I was untruthful. I've worked very, very hard my whole life to be a person of integrity. And so when those labels were offered to me, it was very, very uncomfortable. And because it was so uncomfortable, I do think I shrank into something that I wasn't. That was where the fragility came from, if that makes sense. But the diagnosis was liberating because I had had 4 years of disbelief, of just pull your socks up. Do you think you're the only person who's tired and sleep deprived? But actually I was having uncontrolled seizures and unmedicated seizures. And so it had a huge effect on my ability. And I have to say, I was fully present at work. I was still very, very able and capable. I in no way think it affected my fitness to practice at all. It affected my ability to be a whole human. My ability as a doctor was what I was putting all my energy into, but I don't think I was as present as I could have been at home.
I see this a lot where people prioritize their energy into work under all kinds of really challenging circumstances. And it's such a testament to the hardworking professionalism of the wonderful NHS workers. However, there is this massive toll, isn't there, when you're showing up at work, doing your best, really putting everything into it, but then there's not really anything left for the other sides of life. And you've already said how important it is to you to be this balanced person who cares about all the parts of life that matter to you. And it sounds like the balance got lost for a little while during that period.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't have any headspace to think of the balance. I didn't have any opportunity to think about anything apart from being fit at work. I don't regret it, because actually I couldn't be where I am now without that journey. I just wish that I could tell that person of 10 years ago, yeah, I wish I could go back to 2013, 2015 and say, hey, do you know what? There's more to life than Dr. Amrita Sen Mukherjee. Amrita Sen Mukherjee is just as worthy as Dr. Amrita Sen Mukherjee. And also, what does doctor mean? Like, I just wish that I wish that I had the energy to listen to the things that people were saying to me, because it wasn't that my sister and my husband and my loved ones were not saying this to me. It was I didn't have the energy to tune into what they were saying.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I think sometimes we have this I should have, and that can feel a little critical, can't it? And you've already spoken about, leaning into self-compassion. But I think we can also have, perhaps it's almost like a grief, like a sadness
Yeah.
around some of those experiences that did happen that were so genuinely difficult. And we can really need to mourn the fact that there were times that it was so hard, and that perhaps at the time we didn't have the resources to be able to make the choices that we now know would be helpful. But I don't think we can know that till we've come through the journey sometimes.
You're absolutely right, Lee. And I have to say that moving through grief, my impression is that grief is a lifelong process. You just get better used to managing it. I had to move through my grief into a position of strength. And I had to go through that, and that's okay. But I needed to position myself on a podium of strength because I still was a mother. I needed to be a good role model for my family, for my friends, for me. And I still am trying to do that. I think that we all can be, better humans, better people, better family members, whatever that is. And I'm definitely on that journey. But the way in which I moved through that grief was to process it. I needed to process it to make it part of my story. This temporal lobe epilepsy, these experiences, they're not something that sit here. There's something that sit here, and I can talk about them, and I'm okay talking about them. And yeah, I might get upset from time to time, but that's okay. That's part of the human experience. But generally speaking, I can talk about them quite honestly and openly in the framework of they have made me who I am today. And that was one of the reasons, Lee, why I did my research, why I went to pursue a master's. I wanted to do further study. And so I did my master's in applied positive psychology and coaching psychology. And it was only once I had started that I was like, I need to do my research on post-traumatic growth. This is what has happened to me. This is where I am, and I can actually help people. If I offer research, it then offers a credible voice, not my voice, the voices of my participants. The voices of my participants can offer a credibility around hidden disability in medicine, and that it is a thing. We are so often silenced because of the stigma around illness in medicine. And I really wanted to bring that to light. And that allowed me to own my story, hearing the narratives of those very, very brave participants who I owe so much to. I owe so much to those 5 participants, that it allowed me that opportunity to understand my own story. And again, then moving forward a couple of years, when I did my TEDx talk in 23, I really wanted to honor that part of me, to essentially put it to bed and say, now you can rest, I can move forward. And that's not that part of me doesn't exist. It's just that that's not the whole of me, and that's not the only part of me. And I needed to do that for my own grief process, to be honest.
So there's something about being able to name it and then create some ownership over an area of life that it sounds like at times you felt quite powerless, and there was lots of negativity. And so being able to stand up and perhaps do that TED talk, it feels like a really important time, both in terms of being able to share a really important message with the world, but also something for you very personal about the meaning and taking back that sense of control and perhaps feeling more empowered yourself.
Yeah, because when all these things were happening to me, I was also a trainee. And so I wasn't autonomous in my decision making in terms of my career path, and I was very much dependent on other people deeming me competent, fit for practice, and all those things. So there's a theory of motivation which was coined by Ryan and Decky in 1985, who are 2 very, very powerful researchers in the realms of psychology, positive psychology, and resilience. They came up with a theory called self-determination theory. And they said you need to have autonomy, relatedness, and competence to be motivated, to be driven, to be able to be happy and comfortable in yourself, in your skin. And I didn't have any autonomy. I was told I didn't have any competence, so I thought I didn't have any competence. And I had no relatedness in terms of, yeah, I did at home, but at work I was not very popular, should we say. And so that was painful. And so recognizing that when I stood on the stage, it allowed me to regain all those 3 aspects of myself. And that was hugely powerful for me. That allowed me to really say, I've come home.
This is the Choice Pause, a short 2 to 3 minute tool you'll hear in every episode, each time with something different to help you pause, notice, and choose your next step. Today's pause is the values compass. Take a slow breath in and a longer breath out, and allow your body to settle. Bring to mind the idea of a compass. Ask yourself, where is my values compass pointing today? What matters most in the bigger picture of my life? It might be pointing towards family, fairness, creativity, fun, learning, or kindness, whatever feels most meaningful to you. Now consider which part of my day could reflect this value. Maybe it can show up in how you speak to someone, how you organise your day, or the time you set aside for rest or connection. Finish by naming one small choice that can move you in this direction. Maybe it's making time for an important conversation, a small boundary, or any small action that can support your health, relationships, or well-being. Hold that intention lightly and let it guide the next step you take. Take a final breath and carry this sense of direction with you into the rest of your day. And if we think about your research, which is also really interesting, and I've put a link to that in the show notes as well, could you talk a little bit about some of the people in your research?
Sure. All participants were doctors. All participants were in a situation where they were fit and well, had a life experience that then rendered them with a disability. So part of my inclusion criteria was you have to have an illness which is covered by the Equality Act and defines one as having an invisible disability. So there were 5 people in my study because it's very in-depth qualitative research. So actually what you want to do is you want to have a small sample size but go into great detail around, so really funneling into the lived experience to see what themes and patterns you can bring up. And it was about the voices coming out. So there was huge acknowledgement of the stigma and tribalism that occurs in doctors. There was huge acknowledgement of the fact that disability has to be accepted before we can grow and learn from it. There was the fact that the diagnosis, a label, a name, gives huge power and credibility to a person. So if somebody says, well, I was having symptoms where I was having tingling sensations across my body, I felt a little bit tired, the end of the evening, more tired than I would have done. And there were periods where I just didn't feel very comfortable in my tummy. People would be like, okay, fine. But as soon as I say temporal lobe epilepsy, that gives it a different dimension, a different meaning. It becomes suddenly more credible and suddenly people have more empathy or compassion for that. And so there was a huge recognition in each of these 5 participants that actually the label offers a huge license. It offers you a license to be credible. It offers you a license to own your illness, essentially. And then the major sub-theme that was really coming out in every single element of the conversation was these doctors need to fulfill their value of service. Service to self, service to community, service to family, service to patients, whatever shape that came in, service to the environment. But that need had to be fulfilled. And it was only when they found a way of fulfilling that need did they step into themselves and experience this shift called post-traumatic growth.
So there's something about acknowledgement, recognition, having a label that helps us to make sense and other people, and it being able to seek external support and recognition.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that also influences our internal narrative as well, because we can sometimes lose confidence in ourselves when we're not receiving that external support or when we don't fully understand what's going on. And then also the idea about finding purpose and meaning, like finding some way to contribute in a way that's really meaningful to you personally, whatever that looks like, and not being too boundaried about, well, only working in this type of way, it matters, but actually in the context of my life at the moment, this is a way that feels most meaningful to me. And actually this does fit that service need. Does that fit your kind of understanding of the research you did?
Yeah, absolutely. So with terms of the external validation, absolutely. I think that was hugely important But what was interesting about that external validation was each of the 5 participants and my own lived experience recognized that actually doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter what anyone thinks and what anyone does, because what really matters is that internal validation, that internal comfort of I'm doing what I want to do, how I want to do it, with the support that I have from my loved ones. And that noise can just be silenced, essentially. Mm-hmm. So one of the themes that I had is called concentrate on the linear flow. So my father used to say this to me all the time. My father was a very wise man, and I'm very lucky to have had his wisdom imparted to me for 23 years. And he said to me when I experienced a hurdle, he said, concentrate on the linear flow because the turbulence will always be there. And I was, 20, 21 at the time. And I was thinking, what is this man talking about? What is my dad talking about? I was like, yeah, dad, sure. Like all 20, 21-year-olds do. And I listened to that advice every single day. And every single day, that means everything to me because it means something now. And essentially what these participants realized was, if you think of a river, you have laminar flow in the middle, you have a straight line that goes through the middle. And that's where, if you drop a stone in, you'll see the stone goes all the way through. But if the stone gets caught in the eddies and the turbulence on the side, it will get moved to the side of a stream. Laminar flow will be through the middle. You have eddies on the side. Life is like that. If you concentrate on the linear flow, if you concentrate on what is important to your meaning, your purpose, your values, life will be linear. It doesn't matter. That's your intrinsic motivation. If you listen to the noise on the outside, whatever those things are, you're going to be caught in the turbulence. And that turbulence isn't just a physical turbulence, it's a turbulence in the mind and it's a turbulence in the heart. So actually concentrating on what's important to you, what's important to the people you love, what's important to the people you care about, your microenvironment, that then allows you to focus on your needs, your values, your purpose, and allows you to be the person that you need to be. So when I think about that period of time, when I think about my illness, I was in that turbulent eddy phase. I was on the periphery, going around in circles, not quite knowing where to go, where to turn, because I was constantly being turned. But actually, that was because my focus was outside on the external elements. When I focused myself on the inside, I got caught into that linear flow, and that's the flow that I'm in now. That's how I describe it.
It makes a lot of sense to me too. And it sort of parallels something that comes up sometimes in lots of ways, where we are very aware of how other people are perceiving us. And perhaps if we get too caught up in other people's perceptions, sometimes that comes up in social anxiety as well, where people get very worried about how they're going to, we get that in our social media, how am I coming across? And I would sometimes talk about, we have to look from the inside out rather than from the outside in, because if we're trying to imagine how everyone's perceiving us, what are they thinking? Do they think I'm saying something silly? But actually that's very distracting. It's tiring, and it doesn't actually make us better at interacting because it's a distraction. It takes you into one of those eddies that you were talking about, and you end up looping round and round. You're like a little stick that's whirling around on the side. And so I think coming back to the inside out means exactly where you've started today, back to meaning and purpose, and maybe grounding yourself in the moment, just noticing what you can see, hear and feel. Take a breath and then think, okay, what matters to me? And then take the next step forwards.
And it's not that I don't care about what other people think. What's important is I can't be liked by everybody. That's not the world. There are some people who are going to gravitate towards me, some people who aren't. That's okay. That's life. But I know that when I wake up in the morning and when I go to bed at night, I've lived my life with good intentions. I haven't gone out to purposely hurt anybody. I haven't gone out to say anything that might upset somebody. I go out and every single thing I do is with the intention that I'm going to be helpful, supportive, kind, compassionate. Sometimes I get that wrong because I'm human, but I'm happy to learn. I'm happy for people to tell me, hey, by the way, that wasn't right. We are going to get things wrong. We aren't going to be able to, we're not perfect. We're human. I feel we're on this world to learn because we're not perfect. And so it's something that I've come home to, Lee. There was a huge distraction in the middle. I think I've always tried to live like this. But I definitely feel that I've come home to a point where I'm trying my best, genuinely trying my best, genuinely trying to be a good person, fulfill my career, my potential as I can, but also be very, very present at home. And I have to do that within the means and the boundaries of my health and the means of keeping well. So my work, life, home, work balance, traveling balance, social balance, it has to be strictly monitored and tweaked from time to time. And I get it wrong. And sometimes I'm very irritated with myself because I've got it wrong and I've pushed myself too hard. And then I have to, again, be kind to myself and then work through it.
So it really does sound like it's a very intentional process. And I think that's really important because it gives us back some power. There are aspects of life that are out of control. Whether we, develop an illness is often very much outside our control, but how we respond and how we then look after ourselves in the context of the person that we are and the family life that we have and the pressures of different types of work. It feels like it's really important to keep that flexible awareness of what we need to do. And then it comes back to choice. I mean, this is the choice space, but I do think choice really comes into it because it's sometimes harder to make choices that work for us than to go with the flow. If that laminar flow is actually going down an eddy that's not in the direction of health, it's actually going, sometimes you get stuck in what feels like the rapids of work and it's not actually the flow that goes in the direction that we really want to go. Can you give any sort of thoughts about how we can start to notice and make choices that keep us in the flow, going in the direction that actually suits us?
That's a good question. If you know the answer, let me know. So this is an answer that's specific to me. My health plays a huge part in my decision making, and it has to take front and center, because without being in good health, I can't do anything, quite literally. And so I monitor my somatic symptoms essentially. So that's my calibration. How am I feeling? Let me think about what I've done in the last 2 weeks. Look at my diary. So I write everything down in terms of what I've done, and I notice patterns. When I've done too much in 2 weeks, I don't feel well the next week, for example. Like I can go through those 2 weeks and I can do everything really, really well. And then suddenly I'll be like, my body is telling me that I'm needing to have some rest time. And so again, I've just become more aware of that. I notice it more. So I've become more intentional in what I can and can't do. And I block out time now in my diary. So I genuinely try not to do anything on a Friday, because it's the end of the week and I use that as a rest day. Obviously, if something comes up, then I will do it, but then I'll have to then make time at the former parts of the week. So it's taken years for me to notice how I can best do this, but it certainly is about blocking time out in my diary. It's about saying no to social engagements. It's about explaining and being honest with people. And so I've had to be quite a lot kinder to myself about that. And socially, it's had an impact. It's changed a lot of relationships I have. The people who love me are still with me. The people who might not understand me as well have moved away. And that's okay, because it is hard to be friends with somebody who says, actually, I can't do that today, or I can't do that tomorrow, or I can't, do that in 3 weeks' time. Well, it's in 3 weeks' time. Why can't you do that? Because I know that I've got 2 really busy weeks of work ahead of that. So, it's a learning curve, and it's about being honest with yourself, actually. And it's about nurturing that relationship with yourself. We spend so much time paying respect, loving, nurturing relationships with others. Actually, we have to nurture that relationship with ourselves as well. And I don't think that's something that I knew I had to do. This is a very recent thing.
Okay, so there's a few things there and I'll try and remember them. It's a good test of my memory, but they're all really important. There's something about noticing, the first thing that you said. Yeah. And I think what will vary for different people is what we need to notice. So you've found some particular things that you can monitor in your body that are good awareness points that you think, I need to listen to this. Sometimes people might notice levels of fatigue, or they might notice feelings of stress. Sometimes people don't notice feelings until it's quite late. Sometimes it's only when we get overwhelmed do we then notice. So actually we need to pick up something a bit earlier. So we have to think about what are the earliest signs for me that I actually could notice that might make a change. And then the second thing you said, it was about creating spaces in your week. So making sure that there's just predictable space that's ready for recharge and recovery, and that being quite boundaried around that in a positive way. Doing it with the value of I need to look after myself and I want to show up really well wherever I'm going. You also mentioned about finding your tribe, I would call it, sort of finding people who really get you and connect with you and who understand your needs and actually, work with you and create a space that's very positive. That sort of facilitates us, that final point about finding yourself and that relationship with ourselves. I think when we put all those things in place, it then makes it easier to have a more positive relationship with ourselves. So it's kind of a bit of both, I think we need to do. What do you think?
Absolutely. It's an evolution. It's not something that can happen overnight. It's like, okay, I need to do X, Y, and Z. Right, I'm going to do it because I'm going to pay attention to it. This has taken me a decade. And I wasn't quite aware of what I was doing or what was helping. But now I have the words and the understanding. But again, it doesn't mean that I'm doing it all the time. I'm having to check myself. And so it's about, and this is where that part that I mentioned at the end is really, really important, that having that relationship with yourself, of knowing who you are, knowing what you need. And it's called optimal support matching. It's about what is it that you need, why do you need it, and how can you best deliver it. And so, those three questions, actually, if you keep asking yourself and you keep challenging yourself on that, okay, am I giving myself what I need? It becomes a less selfish thing. It becomes something that we don't have to feel guilty about, and it becomes liberating, actually.
Yeah, I think needs are very liberating, because it's not the need that's in conflict. It's sometimes the strategies that we use to maybe meet that need. So you can hold a need for being a loving parent and a need to be professional and a need for self-care, and they all have value and they don't conflict. But what can conflict is how we use the time to do each one. And so we need to think really carefully about those decisions about how do I do this, and find workable ways that actually honour all our needs. So we sometimes need to be quite creative and not think there's one right way I need to do this. I've got to find it and live up to it, because that makes it quite stressful, and we're trying to live up to something. And I actually don't think that's a very comfortable way to live. So I quite like to explore. And I hope when I'm, hopefully if I make it to old age, that I'm still learning and growing and developing these ideas about what suits me, because I'm guessing that they'll probably be different then than they are now.
Yeah, absolutely. Our well-being changes with every year, every season of life, every phase of life. When I was in my early 20s, my financial well-being luckily wasn't a huge thing that I thought about. But now I'm a grown adult and I have my own family. My financial well-being is something that I do think about. And so we have these phases of life where things become more and less important. My physical health wasn't something I ever thought about. Now it's something I think about with every moment of my day. And it's just about the fact, this fluidity and accepting the changes of life, essentially, and that evolution.
Absolutely. And if you were to think about somebody listening who felt a bit stuck, perhaps, you talked back to your own early self, perhaps somebody who's in that phase where things are a bit tougher, what small step or mindset or might help them to find just a glimmer of hope? It's not about making big changes. Sometimes it's about just moving towards the middle of the river and actually just gently coming out of one of these eddies where we're really stuck. What would you say that might help people to start moving back to find that linear flow?
I would say, Lee, that there are lots of little steps, but I would say the first thing is learn how to sit with yourself. Think about, how can I just be with myself? Because when you learn how to sit with yourself, when you learn how to sit with your own thoughts, you can start to recognize what those thoughts are. You can start to slow them down, and you can start to make some sense of, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? What has happened to make me feel this? And what is that telling me now? What messages are these experiences trying to give me? But you can only do that if you can stop and sit and still yourself in a loving, kind manner. And if that's too challenging, find a trusted person. Find a family member, find a friend, find a colleague, and just ask them to sit with you, because it can be tricky sometimes to sit by yourself. So if that's something that you don't feel comfortable with, find somebody who you feel comfortable with and ask them to sit with you.
So really finding support, both from within ourselves. It sounds quite mindful, the process that you're talking about there, sitting and noticing the thoughts. And maybe when we do sit and notice thoughts, we get less tangled up in them. So the stories our minds are telling us about, this means that that some of the negative stories, maybe the negative beliefs that are being triggered by the experiences we're in, we might be able to create a bit of distance so they feel a bit less powerful, a bit less true. And maybe that then creates a bit of space, perhaps, to then make more healthy choices. And I'd probably build on that too and say, just seek support. You might need to see your GP, or you might need to see a coach or a counsellor or a therapist or an organisation. If you're a health professional, there's organisations like Practitioner Health who are very experienced at supporting people through all kinds of difficulties. So I think trying to do it alone, we often do need to draw on resources from people who are resourced enough to support us in the way we need, I think.
Absolutely. And that comes down to connection. We've all seen through the pandemic, and prior to that, but the pandemic's really amplified it. We've all seen how connection is so important. So connection comes in many forms. It might be connecting with yourself. It might be connecting with others. Whatever that is, find that connection, find the courage to ask for help, and know that you are worth it. all of us are worth it. And just having that courage to say to yourself, I'm important, I'm loved, and I'm worth the fight.
Very powerful words there. Thank you so much, Amrita. That was an amazing conversation. And thank you so much for being willing to share your knowledge and experience in this area.
Oh, thank you, Lee. Huge gratitude to you for inviting me here and having this really enjoyable conversation today. I've really enjoyed meeting you and connecting.
Thank you for listening to the Choice Space podcast. I hope this conversation has offered a little more room to pause, breathe, and find your own way forward. We've linked all the ways you can connect with Amrita in the show notes. And if today's episode has been helpful, please download, follow, and share with someone else who might value that space as well. I'd love to have you with me for the next episode. Until then, take care and keep making space for what matters most.